Okay, so by way of introduction, my name is Jared Nours. I'm a volunteer with the California Democratic Party Coordinated Campaign for Contra Costa County. I've been working with Marilyn Lucy. I'm very happy to see a number of faces here whose names I recognize from the coordinated campaign. So it's great to be able to put a face to the name. A few of us have emailed back and forth previously. Let's see, thank you, Manny, for the introduction and the chance to speak to you guys. I will go over the California ballot propositions for 2020. And by way of disclaimer, a few things. This session is intended to be educational. I'll try and get through these quickly because there are quite a few of them, and some of them are a little complicated. So if you could hold questions until the end of a section, or maybe until the end of the whole session, that would be helpful, just so we can get through this. Again, this is intended to be an educational session, not a persuasive section. So I will share a little bit about both sides of the arguments for these ballot propositions. And then at the end, I will show you the California Democratic Party's position on them. Quickly, how do measures get on the ballot? First, by public initiative, by gathering signatures. Second, legislators in Sacramento can put a measure on the ballot. And then third, following the passage of a law here in California, an interest group can put it up to referendum to say, we disagree with this law, here are the reasons why, and we'd like to put it up to referendum. I'm gonna assume some of you you guys are mostly familiar with this process. Here are the 12 measures up for vote this cycle. There's a measure on stem cell research, a measure on property taxes, a measure on affirmative action, voting rights for parolees, voting rights for 17-year-olds, in primaries, a property tax for real estate, and then a few others. I've broken these down throughout the presentation into a couple different categories, roughly. So to start off with, these are the big ones, and this is not my designation, this is the Chronicle's designation. So propositions 15, 16, 21, and 22 are the big ones for this cycle. And everyone can see my screen, is that correct?
Yeah. Working,
okay, great. So to start with proposition 15, this is the split roll property tax measure. In 1978, proposition 13 capped property taxes at 1% of the assessed value, with reassessments occurring at a change in ownership only. What proposition 15 does is it reassesses the market value of commercial and industrial property annually. The law itself actually says at any point in less than 3-year increments, but I think it's expected to be an annual process for reassessment. So the exceptions here are for agriculture, businesses with less than $3 million in property, businesses with less than $500,000 in tangible personal property. That's because business machinery and equipment is incorporated in property taxes, and then solar and wind initiatives. And that I think was, so that exemption is carried over from the previous law. The Legislative Analyst's Office estimates that this will raise about $6.5 to $12.5 billion. Well, actually, they estimate 6.5 to 11.5, but the higher range of estimates for revenues are 11.5 to $12.5 billion, and the money is expected to go into education, local public services. So the California Democratic Party supports this. Many Democratic elected officials support this. Governor Newsom supports it. Labor unions, the League of Women Voters, the list goes on. This is not an exhaustive list of those parties that support it. And then those who oppose are the Republican Party, various business and tax groups, including various chambers of commerce, and so on. So I won't be able to see if you're raising your hand because I can only see a few of you at a time. If you have any questions, if you wouldn't mind just speaking up, and I can see if I can answer them. Otherwise, we'll just go through the rest. We'll go one by one through the propositions.
Does anyone have any question for him? This is the most important proposition, actually. We had a speaker on this topic way back in January or February. When we had our meeting, at that time we still we had a physical meeting, and we had it, and round table pizza room. So,
Manny, I have one question.
yeah.
What I've heard a lot, Jared, is it will hurt small businesses that rent from large property owners like a shopping center.
Well, I think that the argument there is that basically the price increase is passed along to small businesses, I think, that are renting from large businesses. So there is no exemption that I'm aware of in that instance, because the tax isn't falling directly on the small business. It's being transferred on to the small business.
Well, when I was doing phone banking for Proposition 15, we were told that businesses that were greater value than $3 million were the businesses that would be impacted, but anything that was a small business that had a value of less than 3 million wouldn't be taxed. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead, finish.
Oh, I was just wondering about these ads that I've been seeing that say that property taxes are going to raise, and I know that that's false. I'm just wondering, like, what happens when people are just, I mean, I guess it's just typical of political ads. And I know we went through this with Franklin Canyon, where they sent out a bunch of lies right before the election. So what are the repercussions when things are misrepresented? Because that's the thing that really bothers me with Prop 15. And I'm just wondering, like, where are the ads in favor of Prop 15? Because all I've seen are negative, not positive.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that myself. I actually haven't seen ads for or against, but maybe that's just the kind of media that I consume, so I can't really answer that question. I can't tell you where that $44 million in support of the measure has gone. That would take a little bit more research. So I mean, it's a good question, and I don't have an answer to it, frankly.
Jared.
Yeah.
Celsa Taraya. What encompasses 500,000 tangible personal property? Please define that for me.
So that is like business machinery. That's equipment that you own that is used. Yeah, exactly. So that's beyond just kind of the property that you're on or the building that you're in. That is to say that investment in business machinery is taxed. So under $500,000, it would not be taxed. Over $500,000, it would be.
Thank you.
And that is kind of a funky one because when we think of property taxes, we think of the physical property, we think of the land and the building value. Okay, if no more questions, I am going to try and move on a little more quickly because we have a limited amount of time. I want to be respectful of all your time, and there are a number of these. There are a lot of questions. You guys are asking great questions. And I think that there's a lot of this that's not black and white, so it's worth asking those tough questions. But let's go on to Prop 16. So Prop 16 repeals a 1996 ballot measure that outlawed affirmative action in the state, so this is a legislative initiative, not a public initiative. Basically, this defaults California to the U.S. Supreme Court's interpretation of what forms of affirmative action are permissible or not permissible. I am not an expert on what the U.S. Supreme Court says, but basically here we're saying that affirmative action policies can be put in place at institutions across the state. So there are many Democratic elected officials, the California Democratic Party, a number of chambers of commerce that support this, the NAACP and the ACLU as well. Minority groups that are against this include some Chinese American organizations that represent constituents that may be negatively affected by it. And I have a polling number there that suggests that this does not have a lot of support at the moment, but I should have taken that out because this is intended to be educational, and sometimes those polling numbers can be misleading. Any questions here? Any thoughts here also, other than just questions? Yeah.
Jared, if it passes, do you mean that the Supreme Court still has to have the last say because it California defaults to the Supreme Court's interpretation. So I guess it's not popular because what's the use of passing it when the Supreme Court is above it?
That's a very good question. My understanding about this right now is that the Supreme Court has deferred to the states. But if there's somebody in the room who can answer that question, please go for it. Or more
So
completely answer that
originally with
question.
Prop 209, is my mic on?
Yes, I can hear you, Tiffany.
Yes. So originally with Prop 209, it took away the ability for institutions like universities and colleges to consider race or ethnicity or gender in applications and things of that nature. So this legislation, if Prop 16 passes, that would reinstitute the ability to have the choice to include those things. So,
Right.
And it will occur at the state level.
Yeah.
We'll have approval at the state level.
Exactly. And what we've found is even in the last few years, if you look at the enrollment numbers at UC's CSUs, the numbers of minorities are climbing, but this would also just be one way that we could just even look at gender, for example, you know, and gender identity and those kinds of things to try and really help our underserved populations. But there are some minorities that are opposed to it because they have high numbers already at the UCs, and they're afraid that their numbers will drop them. So.
And if I can add to this, part of this also covers contracting with the state. So with regards to what the U.S. Supreme Court has deferred to the states, I can tell you a lot of states haven't affirmed the extra program. California just doesn't. So since 1996. So probably back in 2015, I did some testimony at the judiciary hearing at that time, and our legislature in California was hearing issues why women and minority businesses contracting has dropped out to less than 1% in state contracting. And so this is one of the things they wanted to do is bring this back. And one of the things I was doing before I retired was researching the contracting issues for minority and women businesses due to the repeal of Prop 209. So this will give them back that opportunity to even be subcontractors in large contracts, because the prime contractors are then held responsible to hire whatever that state department's participation goals are.
Yeah, and that's a super helpful comment because I mean, often in the public imagination, we think about affirmative action as relates to universities, and it's a huge issue for universities, but it goes beyond that.
And employment as well.
And employment,
in states,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, Prop 21. So this is the rent control proposition. There is a law from 1995 that prevents local governments from enacting rent control on properties built after 1995, as well as all distinct properties. That includes single family homes, condos, and townhouses. There was a attempt to repeal this in 2018, and some of you may remember Prop 10, and that did not pass. So this is, rather than a straight repeal, this is an amendment. So this would amend, and there's a typo there, Costa-Hawkins, to allow local governments to enact rent control, and it would change the exemptions essentially. So properties built within 15 years of occupancy, rather than every building built after 1995, would be exempted. And then in instances where the owner controls only two distinct properties, or owns rather only two distinct properties, those would also be exempted. So this would change the exemptions for Costa-Hawkins. This has been sponsored by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which has given nearly all of the $17 million. It's supported by a number of Democratic elected officials, including Bernie Sanders, the California Democratic Party, a number of tenants' rights organizations, the SEIU, and it's been opposed by apartment owners, developers, construction unions, the Republican Party, and Gavin Newsom, although I have forgotten what he said about it. So the spending against this one has way outweighed the spending for it. which I think is not, it's not necessarily a surprise. Any questions here? Okay. Proposition 22, and we're not going in order. Just a reminder, this is kind of grouped roughly based on a number of factors. So Prop 22 is a big one here. A lot of spending on this from the delivery apps and the driver apps. So this basically deals with legislation that was passed in 2019, which classified drivers as employees rather than independent contractors and held companies like Lyft and Uber responsible for the benefits that are paid to them. So TNC and DNC, that stands for Transportation Network Company and Delivery Network Companies, have sponsored this, put a lot of money into it, and they want drivers to be classified as independent contractors again, with some protections, which would be essentially less than the protections that they receive as full classified employees. That includes 120% minimum wage, mileage reimbursement, and certain healthcare benefits, although I can't answer questions on specifically what healthcare benefits. My understanding is that it is, it's less than you get as a full employee. So Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, so on and so forth have pumped $180 million into this campaign. The California NAACP supports Proposition 22. And I've been told that the reason for that is that, especially in difficult economic times, the gig economy, driving for Uber, driving for Lyft is low hurdle to entry. And so it's very helpful for a lot of people. Sorry. And then on the other hand, you have the California Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and a number of unions that are opposed to this, that think that the companies who are spending $180 million on this should be spending that on the employment insurance itself. So that's not to take a side, but those are some of the different opinions and points that have been made about this. I think Uber and Lyft sponsored a study that showed that they would have to reduce services for lower population density areas across the state if they had to keep taking the economic hit to their business that the legislation previously has had on them. Any questions here? Okay. Criminal justice reform. There are 3 measures here. Proposition 17 grants parolees voting rights. Currently, under California law, convicted felons do not regain voting privileges until after parole is completed. Prop 17 allows those who have finished their sentence but have not finished their parole to vote. This is about 40 to 50,000 Californians, depending on the source, who would be given voting rights. Criminal justice reformers, the ACLU, League of Women Voters, and the California Democratic Party support this, and the Republican Party opposes it. Any questions? Proposition 20 has a bit of history here. So this is on criminal sentencing, this is on parole, and includes DNA collection by law enforcement agencies. So back in 2016 and 2018, 2 propositions changed certain felonies and wobblers into misdemeanors. They lessened the sentence. A wobbler is a crime that the judge has the discretion to determine whether it's going to be treated as a felony or a misdemeanor, essentially. And I think that, I don't know if that's exclusive to California, but I hadn't heard of it before I moved here, so that was interesting to learn. So this basically increases the certain sentences. This reclassifies some misdemeanors as wobblers. This classifies some crimes as violent, so that the offenders would not be eligible for parole review. It would give the parole review board parole, and then it would also change some aspects of parole supervision. It would require certain types of crimes to submit DNA to law enforcement databases, and then it also creates new crimes that would be called serial theft and organized retail theft. Here, law enforcement organizations and grocery stores and a few other retailer associations are in support of it. ACLU, criminal justice reformers, Chan Zuckerberg, Governor Jerry Brown are against it. Any questions here?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was wondering if the description, I would imagine in our voting books, is more specific about which crimes are being, because you know, there's such a trend right now to criminalize so many things that honestly turning things into felonies that aren't. So I would just be wanting to know, especially because it's in quote marks, which makes it seem like maybe it's not really violence. So do you know if it's more specified?
It is more specified than that. So I have a background in regulatory risk, and I've read a lot of laws. I have not read the text of this one or most of these. So I'm knowledgeable about these, but I'm not an expert on. I can't answer questions that say, you know, which crimes have been changed here. That I can find that information. It's readily available, and so is the text of the law itself. It's all online. So yes, that information is available. Yep.
Jared, where can you find that information?
There are a few really helpful websites, calmatters.org. That one has a lot of good information on it. Any of these different interest groups that are either supporting or opposing it, you can find their opinions on it for the most part very easily. Some haven't published their statements on why they're supporting or opposing it, or at least I couldn't find them easily, but that's out there as well. Ballotpedia is another one you can look up, but calmatters.org is the easiest one. That's the easiest URL to remember. And they do a similar thing where they kind of summarize arguments for, arguments against, and then they also will link to the text of the proposition itself. So you can sort through that.
Where does the Democratic Party fall on this?
This one I should have put here. KDEM is in support of this proposition, and I will show you at the very end. I have a slide that shows the Democratic Party's position on all of these propositions. Oh, sorry, that's not support, against. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yep, thank you. Yeah, I see your reaction. Yeah, no, that was a slip. Okay, any other questions on this, or shall we move to the next? Proposition 25, ending cash bail. I'm trying to keep my editorial opinions out of this, but I may struggle a bit on this one. Cash bail is a ridiculously old practice. It is considered by many to be heavily discriminatory. Does not treat people the same under the law. If you are low income or high income, the penalty imposed by cash bail means very different things. So the California legislature passed SB 10 in 2018, which ends cash bail, replaces it with what's a risk-based approach, which incorporates a number of factors and then puts it basically into an algorithm to determine whether someone's high risk, low risk, or medium risk. And that those include the likelihood of appearance at court date and then basically the severity of the crime under the law. So this proposition says voters should decide should SB 10 stand? So if you vote yes on this, you're saying yes to ending cash bail. And if you vote no on this, you're saying, let's go back to cash bail. This is one of those ones that was sponsored by an industry association. Basically, the bail industry was like, that's our entire livelihood. And now that that's going to be gone, what are we going to do? We're going to organize a referendum. We're going to gather the signatures, and we're going to try and repeal this law. California Democratic Party is pro Prop 25 to end cash bail. So are a number of elected officials, many labor unions. And then there are two arguments against it. One is, our jobs are gone. And then two is that this is not a good enough way to end cash bail. So the NAACP and Human Rights Watch both say okay, this is better than having cash bail, but it's not good enough because it leaves the decision up to an algorithm. And so they have said that they are not in support of Proposition 25. Any questions?
Yeah, that algorithm is kind of tricky, huh?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I can speak to using algorithms to assess risk a little bit in anti-money laundering. I've done a little bit of work in anti-money laundering in the past, and switching over from a blanket approach, like cash bail is a blanket approach, everyone gets this treatment, to a risk-based approach, has its own issues. But in my experience for anti-money laundering, it was way more effective at doing what it intended to do, which was stopping money laundering. This is obviously that's not an apples to apples comparison at all. And that is a bit of an editorial opinion. And so maybe if something is better, even if it's not perfect, that might be good. But it is tricky. You're absolutely right. And I think that there are some philosophical arguments against that, rather than just policy-based arguments. So. Okay. Okay, so then there are two propositions that are loosely grouped into medical or research. Proposition 14, under California law, hopefully we can move through this one a little more quickly. Any bond issuance needs to be on a ballot proposition. So this issues a $5.5 billion bond that would fund the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which does research on some stem cells, a number of different diseases, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It allows for the hiring of new staff to focus on improving access to stem cell treatments for a number of people. There are a number of people in support of this. California Democratic Party is in support of it. There are a few arguments against it by people who are saying the predecessor of this bond, the Proposition 71 in 2004, made a lot of sense at the time. That was during the Bush administration's pushback against stem cell research. Since then, the environment has changed. Stem cell research has been legalized under the Obama administration. It's a lot easier, and things are a bit different now. So there are some people saying, this made sense in 2004, but it might not make sense now. But it's not as contentious, this one, as some of the other ones, as far as I can tell. It does cost $7.8 billion to the state over a 30-year period as the bond gets repaid. Proposition 23, dialysis clinic requirements. So the background here is that more and more Californians are requiring dialysis treatment for kidney failure. It's up to about 80,000 Californians now, which has meant there's been a boom in the dialysis clinic industry. Prop 23, so a number of healthcare workers have been attempting to unionize in this industry. Prop 8 in 2018 failed. So the union has taken another stab at it. This, instead of capping profits and requiring refunds, this requires physicians to improve care at dialysis treatment centers. It requires certain kinds of reporting on infections and other issues that happen at the clinics. It requires clinics to offer service, and it prevents the closure of clinics without state approval, so that people aren't being denied access to treatment. And I think the intention there is based on for profit-based reasons. If people are being denied access to treatment because of profit-seeking arguments, that's a challenge. So California Democratic Party supports the initiative. So does the Service Employees International Union. It's opposed by a number of healthcare providers who basically argue that some of these issues are already covered. In other cases, this might, increase the cost of providing this care to the patient. So we've spent $7 million in support of the issue and then $93 million against it.
Jared, are these the ones that independent clinics and not tied up to a hospital?
So these are, I don't have the perfect answer to that question, but there are, basically there are chain clinics, if you will. So DaVita and Fresenius operate a number of different clinics. And beyond that answer, I can't give a better answer to that question.
Is this the one that they're saying would end up closing community-based clinics?
So that would be one argument against this proposition. Yes, if you are increasing the costs of providing this care, then some of the clinics may, some of the companies may choose to close some of their clinics.
So what's going to happen to the increasing number of dialysis patients? There's going to be an overflow on the hospitals.
And there's a shortage of doctors. So how is this going to work out?
Yeah,
I mean, these are good questions, and I'm not an expert on dialysis clinics by any stretch of the imagination, so I have to beg a little bit of ignorance here. There are arguments that this reporting and the provision of a physician at each location will increase the service and level of care that's given to patients. There are also arguments that when legislation like this is in the offing, the industries that are affected will always argue that they're going to pull back their services or close certain clinics. And then in practice, that happens at a lesser percentage than is claimed. So when you go back to the transportation network companies, for instance, Uber puts up a huge fuss every time there's a new regulation in New York City or Washington, D.C. And they say, we're going to have to pull out of this place if you pass this legislation that we don't like. And then they don't necessarily pull out of it. In fact, they often don't. I don't know. I know that case study much better than this one. And I can't tell you to what extent, dialysis clinics would close as a result of this legislation. Any other questions?
I just have a lot of concerns about this one.
Yeah.
Financially, the cost of having a doctor stand around and watch people hooked up to machines. I think we need more information on this, because if the costs are such that community clinics close, then I think it could leave some dialysis patients in a big mess, especially if they have transportation issues. So I have concerns about this one.
thank you. Me too.
Yep. Okay, moving on. These ones don't group neatly into any of those categories, and I couldn't think of another name for them, so I'm calling them the others. Proposition 18, primary voting for 17-year-olds. So a majority of states require you to be 18 to cast a vote in an election, and that includes primaries. 18 states currently allow 17-year-olds to vote in primaries. California is not one of the states that allows 17-year-olds to vote in primaries when they are 18 by the time of the general election that primary is associated with. So this is a legislative initiative to put Prop 18 on the ballot. And it's supported by the California Democratic Party, the Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, and opposed by the California Republican Party. Is that clear? If you are going to be 18 by the time of the general election, then under this law, you would be allowed to vote in the primary. But if you are not 18, you would not be able to. If you would not be 18 by the time of the general election, you would not be able to vote in the primary. Any questions?
Jared, I have a question. What are special elections?
Special elections are elections that are taking place, for instance, I think there are kind of a number of different instances, but if there is an election to replace an official who, for instance, has resigned or has died in office, in some cases there's not an appointment to those, there's an election held to fill that seat. And I'm not familiar with the California law and specifically when those instances are. But great question. Is anybody else here familiar? Okay.
Yeah, usually they're in March. When
Okay.
we've had them, they've been in March.
Proposition 19. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Haven't the special elections also been associated with like when cities declare, you know, some kind of financial or otherwise emergency and have a special vote for something?
An answer to that question, does anybody have? I do not have the answer to that question.
Well, I think the prior special, I think most of Contra Costa's special elections will happen in March because the county sets it up that way. But I'm not sure if that's countywide or statewide. But special elections usually have a time. So for example, if someone were to pass away and let's say they voted in November and they pass away in December, then in March there'd be a special election. If there's not time to do that, they can do a special election, I believe in June is some of the other specials. But you can, anytime you have a need in a, someone resigns or someone passes away on an elected position, you can tag on to the next election or you can participate in one of the special elections. So for example, our board, usually we don't have a primary for my election, it's always the November. But if something were to happen, we could, if there's a special election going on, tag on to it. But in those special elections too, as a cost for our district, it would go up significantly. Every time there's an election held, the county has its portion it pays, the school districts have their portions they pay, the cities have their portions they pay, and the community colleges, we all chip in for the cost of these elections, the districts do. And I hate to say it, but if there's no elections, it saves districts money because then they don't have to put it towards those elections, but that's not the democratic way. So, but that's what I know to my knowledge anyway.
Thank you, Vicki. Any other questions on Prop 18? Okay, let's move on. Prop 19. So this is kind of a funky one. This took me a minute to understand. This relates to property tax transfers and exemptions. So as you know from our conversation on Prop 15, property taxes are currently assessed on the purchase of new homes, which means, as may be the case for many of you, if you've been in your home for 20 years, you're still paying on the assessment, you're still paying your tax on the assessment from that prior time, plus I think a little bit for inflation. Also, in terms of background, when you inherit a property, you will maintain the previous tax rates, regardless of whether or not you live in that property. So say you inherit, a wonderful estate, on some beautiful neighborhood from a wealthy parent, and then you decide to rent it out on Airbnb, your taxes will still be assessed at the same rate. Prop 19 allows sellers to maintain lower tax rates when they move into a new home. I think this is actually, I need to double check this. I think this is only for 55 and older, but I'm not sure. I need to double check that for you. It also closes the inheritance loophole so that only inheritors who live in the home they inherit maintain that lower tax rate from previous. So that lowers the tax rate for some sellers and that increases tax rate for other sellers. The funds from this would go to firefighting and local government. One of the funky things about it is that it is sponsored by the California Association of Realtors, who argue that the increase in tax rates upon purchasing a new home is a major disincentive to older folks who want to maintain their lower tax rates. This is basically significantly modified from a similar 2018 proposition that was defeated at the ballot. But there's some arguments out there that this is basically sponsored by the association in order to increase the amount of commissions that they're getting on the sale of homes by older and retired people. The California Democratic Party supports this initiative. Firefighters Union does, so does the California Nurses Association. The Republican Party, the Association of Realtors has basically bankrolled the campaign entirely. The California Republican Party opposes it, and so does one of the taxpayers' associations. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
And it is 55 or older and
Yes.
persons with disabilities.
Yeah, and that's right. And also if you are displaced from your home due to fire.
But isn't this kind of a, because the one of the sponsors, California Association of Realtors, and they want to roll business. So, I mean, it's just kind of a, I don't know, there's something there that would benefit the realtors themselves because of the big business that's gonna come in because people are selling homes.
It's expected to increase the sales of homes for sure.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How much is this supposed to raise? What kind of range of possibilities are we talking about?
It's a very, very good question. Let me see if I can look it up real quickly for you. The Legislative Analyst's Office typically does a pretty good job on putting together expected range of taxes raised. So it's expected to gain potentially tens of millions of dollars of property tax revenue per year. And then those gains are expected to increase over time. Why, I don't know. I expect because more people would be selling their homes and it's not an immediate thing. But it's expected to grow over time to potentially hundreds of millions of dollars as people inherit properties that are then reassessed.
Where does the other 10% go?
Schools, so firefighting 75%, local government 15%, so schools, local government, backfalls.
With that, Jared, with that 15%,
oh, sorry, that should say 20. I think that should say 25%. I see.
Okay.
I see what your question is. Yeah, yeah, that's 25%. Let me just. There we go.
So none of it goes to schools?
Local government includes schools.
So what's this? So it's just the normal split in that area? Is that what it means?
Yeah, the local government decides basically the priorities.
The priorities, or is it the typical split in property taxes, whatever's set in that area?
That one I'll have to look up for you as well. I don't know. Again, I have not read the legalese on these.
Huh.
So is that part of the local control funding?
A lot of questions on this one. I cannot answer all of these questions.
Oh.
Anything else here? Prop 24 is another funky one. Basically, this is sponsored by an individual who bankrolled it. Alistair McTaggart, who's a real estate developer in the Bay Area, and who I think in Sacramento had been basically, I was told he was unheard of before he took a strong interest in consumer privacy laws. So his stated goal in sponsoring CCPA is to ensure that businesses cannot undermine consumer privacy laws, specifically the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, which mirrors the European GDPR, which basically set the standard for privacy laws and protection of privacy rights, especially as relates to technology companies and social media companies and things like that. So stated goal here is protect consumer privacy laws with the thinking that basically, if you don't enshrine these permanently, businesses will continue trying to chip away at them with unlimited resources over the years. However, it's funky for a couple of reasons. It recasts the CCPA, includes a new right for individuals to correct information that is incorrect about them, creates a new privacy agency within the state government that can enact and enforce these rules, including fining technology companies that are in breach of the law, I think up to $7,500 for incidents. But it's kind of a mixed bag here. It also reduces the number of businesses that must comply. So only companies that hold data on 100,000 households a year or more are subject to these laws. The individuals who sponsored it are basically part of an organization seeking to protect consumer privacy laws, and they have bankrolled it entirely. The Republican Party opposes it, the ACLU opposes it, the Consumer Federation opposes it. The California Democratic Party is neutral on it, as so is the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, which read through the legislation and basically said, okay, this improves some things, but kind of weirdly, it also makes other things a little bit worse. So it's a mixed bag.
Do you know why the ACLU is opposed?
A number of organizations basically say the CCPA is a new law. We don't know particularly how well it's going to work or how well it's not going to work. Let's wait and see how it's going to work before we mess around with it.
Jared, I have a question for Prop 19. Can we go back to that? Probably Dion can answer.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, our property tax transfer piece of pie is really, really low right now with a 25% for the local government. Would that increase our share of that property tax transfer?
I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Go for it, Dion, please.
If that passes.
So let me say this, my understanding of this is only what's in the voter manual, but my understanding is if we have businesses that fall into this category, and we don't have many businesses in Hercules that are that large, there would be more tax revenue for the city. That's my understanding from reading page 38 of the voter guide. But I don't have any special information on this. So we potentially could, but I am not an expert in this particular item. But again, if you look at the size of the businesses that are affected, can you think of many in Hercules that are of that size?
She's talking about Prop 19, not 25 or 24.
Yes.
Prop 19.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Prop 19 on the property tax transfer share of Hercules itself.
Oh, and I'm sorry, on this one, I don't know much about this one at all. I know less about this one, so I will be quiet on this one.
I believe the answer is no to your question.
It doesn't seem like it would.
It looks to me like this situation is if you have a senior citizen who's been in a house for a long time and paid a certain level of property taxes and wants to sell and buy something new, but they have to buy the current market rates, which means their property taxes, they would have to pay whatever those are.
Right.
It could be a huge increase for those folks. So
It
this
doesn't change the property tax increment to the city. It doesn't change that.
Yeah, it doesn't
That
change
formula is formulated at the county level.
Yeah.
And whether they get, we were hoping that any new funds would actually help them to increase our increment, but unless there's an actual something happens to make them do that, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Okay.
But to answer Susan's question, it allows sellers to maintain their lower tax rate. So if you're over 55, you could maintain your lower tax rate when you move to a new home.
And that would be good for the local economy because then they'd be able to put their house up for sale. And the sellers, the buyers would pay it at the market rate, but the seniors would be protected.
Right.
That's true. It still won't change our property tax increment, but at least there'll be more.
Well, it could, not the increment, but it could be more, right? Because it would be at whatever the current market rate of the value of the property.
It would be higher based upon the new selling price of the house.
Right.
It's also better for our community if seniors can downsize without
Yes.
paying a penalty, and families can
Move
move
in.
in communities where the schools are actually located, because right now the seniors are staying in their homes and not downsizing and moving out of their 3-bedroom homes.
Right.
Okay, so next one, Jared.
Okay, so that brings us to the end. So of those 12 ballot measures, Prop 24 is the last one on the list for us to discuss. I didn't know if there were any questions on this one. It is a funky one. It's the one that's kind of the hardest to wrap your head around, in my opinion.
Does this mirror the European rules? I know the right to correct is in the European rules.
So the CCPA, yes, exactly. The right to correct is in the European rules. The CCPA in general, at large, was modeled off of the European rules, the GDPR.
With the exception of the right to correct.
Yeah, and there may be other exceptions in there that I'm not aware of, but it was modeled, yeah, after.
Yeah, but does the European limit the number of businesses? So this 100,000 households a year. What is the European?
That I don't know the answer to. I'm not an expert on the GDPR.
I'm just wondering if it's mirroring it completely.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
But it's a funny thing because the California legislature, which is majority Democrat, super majority Democrat, approved it, but the California Democratic Party is neutral on it.
It's
So this is basically an amendment to the CCPA. So this is a few changes here and there. The California Democratic Party is in favor of the CCPA, but on this specific amendment, they are neutral.
But the ACLU is opposed. I would think it's because they don't want any weakening at all of.
Yeah, there are definitely arguments that say this actually has a bunch of bones in the bag that are going to be tossed to the tech companies themselves. Again, it's a mixed bag. This is not all